Hi there, and welcome to the IBAC Tech Trek podcast, where we explore the outer reaches of insurance technology. I'm your science officer on this journey, Tom Reid, and beaming aboard to join me today is Jamieson Fregeau from Quandri. Hey, Jamieson, how's it going?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Hey, Jamieson, for those people who are listening who don't know you or Quandri, can you give us a bit of background about yourself and the company?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Jamieson, and Fregeau actually is the last name.
Fregeau.
All
Sorry,
good.
my bad.
I've gone through a lifetime of it being pronounced incorrectly. It happens pretty often. But yeah, in terms of background for me, Quandri. I actually started Quandri while I was in university with my brother Jackson. So I was in university as a computer engineer, and I ended up working in a startup while I was at university. And the startup was very different than what Quandri ended up being, but kind of had the realization that you can go and start a business like this on your own. And so I came back from having worked at that startup and was really excited about the prospect of doing something myself. And Jackson actually coincidentally was also working at a startup at that time. And so we started bouncing ideas off against each other for different types of startups. And that's where the idea for Quandri originally came, was from a problem Jackson had at his business. And so while I was in university, we jumped right into building Quandri, which at the beginning was about automating high volume repetitive work for businesses. And we did that and do that through building software agents or software bots to automate high volume repetitive work. And so pretty quickly from when we started is we ended up focusing directly in the niche of insurance and specifically working with brokerages, because we found that the pain point around high volume and repetitive work was much higher than any other industries that we had worked with. And at the beginning, we started working with all sorts of different industries. And so over the years, we have somewhat pivoted Quandri to be very focused within the insurance brokerage space and specifically on the renewal process. And so as of today, what Quandri does and why Quandri exists is to improve and help fix the renewal process. And so what we've built is a platform that sits on top of a brokerage that helps a brokerage run its personal lines renewal process. And so we have essentially bots or agents that get a username and a password that log into a broker's BMS system the same way a person does, and will help with the renewal process in a number of different ways to help improve the efficiency of it, save brokers time, improve retention, mitigate E&O risk, all sorts of things that are really important at renewal that we help brokers do because of how important it is.
Awesome. All right. Well, you've already hit on a few of the key questions I was going to ask you. Does it integrate with any other tools that are out there, or is it just to the BMS?
Yeah, right now, directly with the BMS. We've looked into integrating with portals and other things in the past, but right now we've kept that scope solely to the BMS, and specifically just because that's where brokers spend most of their time, and we want to be in the place that brokers spend most of their time. We integrate into a lot of things on our end, like email and messaging services, et cetera, but that isn't facing the clients. It's only in the BMS.
Okay. Well, I mean, I would still count that as integration personally, but I would also say that just getting data from a BMS to an email, from a Quandri to an email to any one of those tools, I count that, because again, when somebody's doing double entry in 21st century, that really shouldn't exist, right? In a lot of cases.
Yeah, so, very much so.
Let's talk about the business impacts. You talked a bit about what the tool does. Let's talk about what the business outcomes are. And at a very high level, I like to quantify business outcomes in terms of efficiency or productivity is sort of item number one. How it improves the client experience, number two, and potentially how the tool improves sales / growth as number three. Can you talk about how Quandri benefits the broker in each of those different categories?
Yeah. So taking a step back at what Quandri is, and so we have this platform that a broker can go into and they can configure different parts of their renewal process. And so right now, what that really focuses on is the renewal review process. So what a broker can do is go into Quandri and configure a bot to run their renewal process, and they can configure how they want that renewal process run. So when documents download into the system, our bot will go into, say, Epic, look at this year's renewal, look at last year's renewal, look at any endorsements that happened throughout the term, look at all of the information that is in the system on the client in terms of claims, open activities, communication to the client over the course of the term, and aggregate all of that data together and put together a report. That report will provide a high-level overview of the policy, what's going on it, a missing section of what could be or was on that policy last year but is not currently, and then talking points, key attributes that the broker wants to know about. So in terms of business outcome, what that really, the end result for the brokerage using Quandri is first and foremost, just essentially eyes on 100% of their policies at renewal time. Is that before Quandri, it is really difficult. It's either it takes a lot of time from a brokerage or they aren't able to do it to review all of their policies every year. But with Quandri, that's possible. Is that a brokerage can rest assured that all policies are looked at either by a person or by Quandri itself. And you can configure key attributes on that report that in certain conditions, you create a specific activity for a broker to look at. So you know if certain coverages are missing or if you have a very large premium increase or your third-party liability has decreased, for example, key attributes that are important to a brokerage, you will get flagged about and you can look at. So the efficiency there, your first category, it depends on the size of the brokerage, of course, but we've seen anywhere from repurposing a single staff member to higher value work to all of the brokers across a business not needing to spend the first 2 hours of their day reviewing their renewals that came in that day. And so the kind of large scale efficiency ranges a lot for the size of the brokerage, but is quite meaningful and is often in the range of 1 to 10 full-time employees.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're talking about an hour or two per personal lines employee, that's, assuming an 8-hour day, that's 12.5 to 25%, which is massive given that most brokers, the most significant cost on their books. So from a client's perspective, we talked about how every file is being looked at, every policy is being looked at. People have more time for higher order tasks, which potentially would include talking to clients. How have you seen your customers translate that into client experience and growth outside of, okay, productivity generates potential. How is that potential being used by your brokerage clients?
Yeah. So aside from simply having more time to speak to clients, specifically with Quandri, we see Quandri get used to drive growth in two different ways, or provide a better client experience in two different ways. So one is inbound. There's a lot of conversations happening with clients every day, especially around renewal time. And the broker is getting the details of the renewal at the same time that the end client is. They're both getting the documents at the same time. And so one way Quandri has really helped brokers is eliminate the backlog that exists of the renewal. Brokers are often working 6 to 8 weeks behind what is currently downloading. And so if there are large changes to a policy, the client is getting those, looking at it, calling their broker to say, hey, what's going on with my policy? Why is this happening? And the broker is doing a bit of a scramble to figure out what's happening on that policy so that they can accurately and best serve their client. And so on the inbound side, Quandri helps not only remove that backlog, but also ensure there is a very well written report of the policy and what's going on and why it is increased for a broker at any point. So when I go and look up an account and I can see one client's renewal policy when they call in, I can go directly to this report Quandri creates. And when they're asking me why and what is happening with my policy, I have a very good understanding and quick and easy way to understand what's going on with that policy and best serve my client. So that just improves your client experience and makes the broker better at what they do best. So that's one side. The second side is being proactive. And so if brokers aren't spending a large portion of their time reviewing renewals, is they can be acting on renewals so that they can actually drive growth out of their book of business. And so Quandri actively flags when things are outside of the minimum standard that a brokerage wants to set, and when there's opportunity for cross-sell and upsell on that renewal review. And so if it configured to be many different situations, but if it is a single line auto, for example, Quandri will flag that there's a potential to put a HAB policy on that. Or if it's missing service line or missing overland, Quandri is going to flag that there's an opportunity to add these really important coverages onto this policy to both ensure that that client is best protected and to drive growth for the business itself.
Great. And those, if you talk about overland water or service line, I mean, those are things that easily get overlooked, especially in the mad rush to conclude a renewal. I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, that brokerages who use Quandri are seeing a much higher uptick in that kind of upsell than the average broker.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's talk about some technical considerations here. Let's talk about security first, right? So you are moving client data around. How does Quandri ensure the security of that client data?
Yeah, we ensure security. It's through a mixture of best practices that we hold, as well as baking those directly into the technology itself. So some of the things that are really important to us is we're never going to get away from the fact that we're processing really important sensitive data. And so encryption is really important. Whenever that data is being moved from one place to another, we're ensuring it's encrypted. Whenever that data is held at rest, we're ensuring it's encrypted, because things do need to get held on our side for us to understand what is happening within a policy and provide that back to a client. So encryption both in rest and at transit is really important. Access is the next thing on that list that makes it really critical for us of who is accessing that data on our side and how are they accessing that and how does access change over time. So essentially, for data that Quandri does have on our end, not everybody can access that. Only the people that are required to have access to that data can access it, and the ability to access that essentially is on a rolling basis of access changes quite often. And then the actual data that Quandri interacts with is a really important piece here. So Quandri is extracting different pieces from PDFs, is extracting different pieces from the BMS itself. What we are doing is we're differentiating the data that we're extracting between PII and what is not PII, and ensuring that that data that we interact with that is not crucial to providing the service, that we essentially anonymize and are not storing on our end. So there's essentially a number of different ways that we're ensuring security and ensuring best practices on data, but baking it both into our software itself through protocols like encryption and into best practices around our processes of interacting with data, like access controls, are some of the ways that we ensure that client data is secure and only accessed by the right people.
Awesome. All right, let's talk about scale, right? So maybe to help out here, you can talk about how does Quandri scale the bots? How big is your smallest customer versus how big is, give or take, how big is your biggest customer?
Our smallest customer is about 20 employees, I believe. Our largest customer is a few thousand. And so Quandri is really built to handle any scale that can possibly exist at a brokerage. And while you do see returns on that as a business at any scale, we do find that the larger the business is, the better the return you see on Quandri is.
So, Jamieson, I'm interested in knowing the relative benefits between smaller brokers and bigger brokers. Right? You'd mentioned that you see more benefit from a bigger broker. Can you dive into that and sort of explain why that is?
Yeah. So smaller brokerages are often, we find, they might not be, for example, reviewing every renewal that comes in or attempting to review every renewal because they don't essentially have the critical mass of people to do so. Whereas we often see as a brokerage gets larger that they might separate out a specific team to be handling things like renewal reviews and more administrative work. And they've built their brokerage in such a way that there is a lot of this work that Quandri is enabling them to replace the higher value work built into the brokerage. Where at smaller brokerages, we often see that that's not quite the case. And for example, brokers might just be handling this themselves on the side of their desk. And so when we have been working with really large brokerages, is they often have an entire department dedicated to renewal reviews and doing the exact work that Quandri does. And so the return on investment is much larger because they themselves have invested in this at the brokerage.
So the larger brokers are essentially doing work prior to Quandri. They're doing work that a smaller broker potentially is not doing.
Yeah.
So therefore, there is opportunity for you to take that work away or reduce the impact of it. Right? I guess there's always a couple of ways to be more efficient. One is just not to do a thing, and the other one is to do the thing but do it, more cheaply or more quickly or what have you. So okay,
exactly.
Got it.
What Quandri does is enable the smaller brokerage to compete with the larger brokerage that would have been paying for this with people that the smaller brokerage didn't have access to, and helps the smaller brokerage provide the best service to their client as well.
Right. So the smaller brokerage who may not have been doing this work now can, and so therefore their custom experience is better. So they're adding quality, if you will, to their processes, whereas a larger broker already had that, who was paying for it with human effort, can now do the same thing but for cheaper.
Although it's worth highlighting that we do still think that the renewal review that Quandri does is better than having a person do it, regardless of whether a person is dedicated to that, simply on the basis of not making mistakes, being able to do it faster. Obviously, we're talking about cheaper, but just the quality of that review itself, we think Quandri can produce is better than that, which a person does.
Okay, so you think that, but you're biased.
Of course.
Do your brokerage clients think that as well?
Yeah, I believe so. I think the standardization in which it's always the same, regardless of the carrier, regardless of the situation. What we do know is that there is a lot of nuance within insurance, and there are a lot of variation between carriers, policy types, form types, provinces. And so Quandri does increase the level of nuance and the level of depth that we can go to. And so today, I do think that there are definitely brokers out there that can do a better renewal review than Quandri. if it's in their specific domain with their carrier and the policy types that they know very well. But Quandri continues to increase the level of nuance that we can go to until it will be better than any other person can do.
That sounds ominous, but for now we'll say that's a good thing. Okay, so let's talk about support for implementation. Earlier in the conversation, you talked about how a broker can change, how the brokerage can change this parameter, that parameter, what have you. I'm sure most people don't open up the Quandri configuration screen and instantly know how to do this. So how do you support implementation, and what about ongoing questions and so on? How does that work?
Yeah, we have a pretty hands-on implementation model. So implementation with Quandri runs between 30 and 60 days. I would say it averages closer to 30. It starts with a kickoff call with our team after somebody has signed. And on that kickoff call, what we're going to do is walk a client through what implementation looks like. And we're also going to walk them through what Quandri's platform looks like, which is where somebody interacts with their robots itself and configures it. So on that kickoff call, what we're going to do is we're going to set up the robot to have default parameters. We're going to get access, get a username and password to your BMS system, and get it running on a test run. And so right within the first week, we're going to have the bot set up and running within the system. And generally in the next 3 to 4 weeks, what someone is going to be doing is they're going to be testing the robot. They're going to be changing the parameters of what the bot is reviewing on that renewal to make sure it's in line with what they want to see on it. And then there's also going to be a lot of training of the end brokers themselves. So Quandri supports will run workshops with the end brokers that actually use this renewal review within our implementation process. So we're often in implementation running webinars with 50 brokers, 90 brokers to actually make sure we are walking through and supporting the change management that needs to happen. Because a good lesson that we've learned is that it's not just about getting the tool working properly in implementation that is important. It's handling and supporting the change management to make sure the tool and the implementation of the tool is successful itself. So we really focus on both getting the tool up and running correctly, but also supporting on the change management side during implementation.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, it's the best tool in the world that is not wielded properly doesn't produce the right outcomes, right? So that's super important.
And good tools that do affect change have change management associated with them. And it's the more critical part. It's what we've learned.
Absolutely. I think that it's one thing for us to sit here and go, oh, right, so there's a whole team that does renewal review and Quandri does that too. Obviously it's better, but organizational change completely outside of technological improvements is a significant endeavor all by itself and can derail any opportunity, regardless of what that is, if you don't do it properly. So that's all great. Now I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest you're probably not a charity, and that you do, in fact, charge for your labor and your work. So maybe talk about how the pricing works. If this is a secret, by all means, keep it so. But go into as much depth as you think appropriate.
Yeah, our pricing is very simple. You're right. We are not a charity. We price based on the size of the brokerage itself. So based on the PIF count. And so depending on a brokerage's PIF count, they get put into a different pricing tier, ranging from a few $1,000 a month to $5,000-$6,000 a month, depending on the size of the brokerage. It's pretty simple.
Okay, so I don't want to end this conversation on here's a dollar sign. So maybe tell me if you can sort of relate the cost of Quandri to the financial benefit that you've seen. Don't give me the edge cases, but if you look at sort of in the middle of the road, if I'm paying a couple of grand a month to Quandri, how much am I getting back as the brokerage?
As I said before, it obviously depends on the size of the brokerage, but we're seeing pretty significant cost savings on any implementation and with any customer that we're working with.
How quickly does the tool pay itself back?
So we'll often see during with a customer that they're going to be seeing a 50%, 60% reduction in their costs on their renewal process with Quandri. And so we'll be paying often paying back that year itself for that customer.
That's pretty rare to have a sub 1 year sort of payback period. So that's fantastic. All right. So we're almost at the end of our journey into Quandri here. Is there anything else, Jamieson, that you want to bring up that I haven't asked you that you think is relevant to our audience?
I think just a call out on Quandri's focus on the renewal process itself. And so I've been talking here a lot about renewal reviews, because for us that's the first step in the renewal process as it is today. But as a business, we've really realized and are starting to act on the fact that the renewal process is a key part of running a brokerage, and that there's a lot of room for improvement. And so the vision that we have for what Quandri becomes is that we will start by reviewing this renewal. But then one of the things we're working on right now is actually having the ability to requote it as well. And so we will have a bot do the renewal review process, and then pretty soon we'll be able to actually have the bot go in and quote that policy with different carriers as well. And so what we see for Quandri over time is the ability to automate a large portion of the renewal review process and provide the policies back to brokers that they should actually be looking at, and they can spend the time that those policies need to make sure that they do what they do best. But Quandri is able to review it and quote it, and potentially communicate with the client itself. And so requoting is a really important thing and a really, really exciting thing that we're working on right now, that we're soon going to be reaching out to different customers that we have and different people in the market to work with. We're in the kind of middle stages of building this, and intend to have clients live on requoting before the end of this year.
Wow, fantastic. That's something to look forward to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Jamieson, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. I really appreciate your time, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you as well, Tom. I really enjoyed this. It was a lot of fun to chat with you and to chat about all the exciting things at Quandri.
The world of insurance is changing because the world of tech is changing. Join us on the journey at ibactech.ca.